Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. You join me for part 2 of my rebuttal to the 149th Gilead graduation. If you've never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you might be wondering, what is a Gilead graduation? Well, it's the graduation of the Gilead School. The Gilead School is a long-running school run by Jehovah's Witnesses. It happens twice every year. The class goes on for about 5 months, and the students are drawn from all over the world. Typically, they will be Jehovah's Witnesses who have already demonstrated over a long period of time their dedication to the organization. So we're talking people who have been in, quote, full-time service of the organization for many years. Perhaps they are special pioneers who devote over 100 hours every month to preaching. Perhaps they're Bethelites from the many branch offices of Jehovah's Witnesses around the world. Perhaps they've been working for many years in the remote translation offices. In any case, we're talking about people who have demonstrated their dedication to the organization, and twice per year, Jehovah's Witnesses run a 5-month class called the Gilead course, basically to hone the indoctrination of these individuals and help them understand at a far more deep and profound level what's expected of them as representatives of the organization. Anyway, we're now up to part 2 of the Gilead graduation. If you haven't already seen part 1, it might be a good idea to go back and watch that particular video. But we have a bit to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Over the past few years, we have all looked forward to what has affectionately been called the inside story. This time it will be conducted by another one of the Gilead instructors, Brother Richard Chilton. Take it away, Brother Chilton.
Welcome to this edition of the Inside Story.
Ooh, goody, we have another inside story. So yes, those of you who've been keeping an eye on these Gilead graduations will know that since 2017, they've done the Gilead graduate interviews, which were always a part of the program. They'd sit the Gilead graduates down, or they'd select maybe 2 or 3 couples, sit them down and interview them to find out what their background was prior to joining Gilead. And in 2017, for the 142nd class, they decided to do it a bit differently, and they introduced a new chat show style program called The Inside Story. Here is a rather cringeworthy piece that they created back then in 2017 to let us know how the inside story came to be.
Thanks for coming. Follow me. I need to talk to Ken about something really important. Come on.
Man.
Ken, I have some interesting news I need to share with you. It's exciting.
I can tell by the look on your face something's up.
It is. It's about the Gilead graduation program.
Oh, no, not a change.
Yeah, a change. But it's so intriguing. It's positive. You know, the student experiences part that we've had for many years, they share their field service experiences.
I love that part.
And I do too. But the teaching committee wants to broaden it out. Look, Ken, the students are from all over the world, coming from various branches.
Yeah, that's true.
They have experiences they can share perhaps from their own branch, or maybe something about the kingdom work that is taking place in that country. It's going to be exciting, different, interesting.
I like it, but I'm
It's
wondering...
just broadening it out.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, everybody's used to that experiences format.
I know.
What's the format of this new segment?
You're going to love it. A talk show.
A talk show?
A talk show.
It means, though, you're going to have to build a set. You're going to have to have lighting.
What about if they can sing, or there's musical instruments that they can play? We'll need a little spot for them to actually perform a song.
I'm thinking, though, if it's going to be a show, It's
What are you
gotta
thinking?
have a name. You
Make
ready?
it unique.
Okay. The Inside Story.
Ken.
Because you're getting
It resonates.
You're getting the
I
inside
love
story.
it.
On
The
this.
inside story. Let's go with that.
Okay. But Mark, we are weeks away from Gilead
I know.
graduation.
We'll have to work hard to pull this off.
Do you think we can get this done in time?
Let's see.
I will never get bored of that introduction to the Inside Story. That, for me, is one of the gems of the JW Broadcasting era so far. The genesis of the Inside Story, when Mark Numair went into Ken Stovall's office to pitch him this idea in such a natural way. I mean, we totally felt like a fly on the wall watching this totally spontaneous conversation take place. So anyway, this is how the Inside Story began. And what I most loved about those initial episodes, which I think were mostly hosted by Ken Stovall, is they would have some music. And the music was typically interesting.
And in our hearts are treasured words to glorify the one who made all of this come true. We won't give up, and no, we won't give in. Jehovah's on our side. This is our race. We'll win. We'll weather storms. Jehovah's strength will know of his right hand, of his mighty arm. We'll never let go.
Yes, this for me was the golden age of the Inside Story, but I don't know, it just seems to have been watered down in recent years, particularly this year, or for the 149th class, doesn't have the music. It doesn't have the live studio audience that we saw there getting down to whatever song the students wrote for the graduation. Instead, this year, it will just be the interviews, I'm afraid, and depressingly, it seems, Ken Stovall has been dropped for at least this episode of Inside Story. If I had to hazard a guess, it's because he's moved on to more important things, such as a spin-off to the Inside Story called Extraordinary Experiences.
Please know we love you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of Extraordinary Experiences.
It's quite sad, really, because in my opinion, Ken Stovall is one of the few at the organisation who can handle himself in front of a camera, has a little bit of charisma. So Extraordinary Experiences' gain is very much the Inside Story's loss. We will be without Ken for the 149th Gilead class Inside Story. Instead, the show is going to be hosted by Richard Chilton.
Now, your current assignment is at the branch office in Korea. How long have you been serving there?
Well, if you count the first 1.5 years I served at Bethel, that would be 9.5 years. I say that because I was reassigned. I actually left Bethel to go to prison.
Well, now, that's not something we typically hear as a reason for leaving Bethel, is it? What happened?
You see, in South Korea, all males become eligible for military conscription when they turn 19, and a draft notice comes sometime after that. As for us Jehovah's Witnesses, because we refuse military service, the result would be a 1.5 year sentence in prison, but you may not go right away.
Now, that's interesting. What would be the factors that would determine when your prison sentence would actually begin?
From the time you receive a draft notice until you actually go to prison, especially in recent times, that time period was unknown and different for each brother. A lot depended on the judge you get. As for me, I had to wait 5 years from the time I first appeared in the court until I finally went into prison. I had to make a choice as to how I was going to spend my time. Do I use that time just staying at home, doing nothing, planning nothing, since I could go into prison at any moment? Or do I use that time to earn some money for the time when I'm finally released from prison? Or do I use my life to the full, pursuing spiritual things first while I could do so freely? So I decided to pioneer. I also volunteered at the International Convention. Here I'm welcoming the delegates as they arrive to their hotels. I also got even accepted to Bethel. Here I'm working in my assignment. And here are the brothers and sisters working in the computer department where I work.
How nice.
Pioneering and Bethel service really helped me to prepare my heart for the time when the call finally came to go to prison. And it was during this period that I really grew spiritually.
Well, I guess pioneering and Bethel can have that positive effect on a person, can't it?
So we're hearing from Sung-hee Lee, who again is one of the students for the 149th Gilead class, and he is giving his experience, which mostly involves the matter of conscientious objection. For those of you who don't know, South Korea, until recently, jailed young Jehovah's Witness men who refused to join the country's military. In fact, over 18,000 Jehovah's Witness men have been imprisoned in that country over the last 60 years. It's no longer happening, thankfully, because the Korean authorities recognize that they need to come up with some kind of solution that will not criminalize people for following their religious beliefs. If any religious minority decides that it's against their beliefs to take up arms, obviously it's the responsibility of the country to come up with a solution that will allow them to satisfy their security needs while at the same time not violating people's religious rights. The one thing I would say about this matter of conscientious objection as it pertains to Jehovah's Witnesses is that we don't really hear the full story whenever this matter is touched upon. You heard there Sung-hee Lee referring to the fact that young Jehovah's Witness men have been jailed for up to a year and a half due to refusing military service. What you won't have heard is that the military offers conscientious objectors the opportunity to do their service without fighting. In those instances, you can end up with, some kind of desk job, I guess, where you're not required to go out and shoot people, or it's not likely that you'll ever be in a situation where you need to take another human being's life. What you are required to do is do 5 weeks of basic training, so learning how to clean and fire a weapon, doing assault courses, basically being trained as a soldier and in the art of warfare. You're not killing anyone, you're just learning how to be a soldier. Jehovah's Witnesses object to doing that because they say this contradicts Isaiah 2 verse 4, where it says they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. They say, well, if it says in Isaiah that they, Jehovah's people, won't even learn war anymore, then this means that Jehovah's Witnesses can't even do the basic training, which of course is not what Isaiah 2 verse 4 is saying. It's using prophetic language to describe the prosperity and peace of God's people in ancient times. It's not suggesting that it's a sin to even learn how to use a sword or a weapon, but that's the extent to which Jehovah's Witnesses follow Bible verses when it comes to their views on pacifism. And let's be clear, I can relate fully to those who are pacifists and who don't want to be involved in warfare. I wouldn't describe myself as a pacifist necessarily, but I can understand why some people feel that way. I just feel it's fanatical to suggest that it's better for young men like Sung-hee Lee, and again, there have been over 18,000 Sung-hee Lees when you think about it, over the past 60 years. I think it's unreasonable and fanatical to suggest that these men, it's better for them to spend a year and a half in jail than to do those 5 weeks of basic training where they're again crawling through mud and assembling and firing weapons, even if that's all it is, and they're then doing a desk job, or they're then doing something that doesn't call upon them to kill anyone or be violent in any way. I feel it's fanatical, and I feel it's frankly irresponsible of the organization to be putting literally thousands of young men in that position. And South Korea is just one country in which this has been the case. I find it interesting that in this particular interview, they seem to skirt over the fact that it was a year and a half. A year and a half is a big chunk of someone's life. That's a huge chunk of your young life. It's time you will never get back again. And goodness knows how Sung Hee Lee will feel if he ever wakes up from his indoctrination and realizes he effectively lost a year and a half of his young life for no reason.
Do you mind talking about how life was for you in prison?
There were definitely moments when I felt anxious, but my 3 fleshly brothers and many other Korean brothers, they also served their time in prison. And their choices and experiences helped me decide how I was going to spend my time in prison. So I decided to make a list right away, what to do while I'm in prison. I made some spiritual goals, such as reading Proclaimer's book and reading other publications. And a group of about 7 to 8 brothers in the same prison cell, we discussed the daily text together every day. And in the evening, we called it evening worship, similar to morning worship in Bethel.
Well, that was certainly wise use of the time that you had there. What can you tell us about the current situation in South Korea for our brothers in connection with military service?
Just a few months ago, the authorities adopted alternative service for proven conscientious objectors. Under this arrangement, you are not labeled as a convicted criminal, and you don't live in a prison cell, but live in a more communal living arrangement. But there is one thing about this alternative service. Instead of your prison sentence being a year and a half, you have to do alternative service for 3 years.
Wow, okay, double the time. You know, our hearts really go out to our brothers and our sisters that have served time in prison for righteousness' sake. But you were able to complete your prison sentence. What was next for you once you were a free man?
Without hesitation, I immediately filled out another application to return to Bethel, and I was accepted to return to Bethel.
Well, good for you. We're glad that worked out.
I find it interesting that it wasn't enough that he was in prison for doing what was expected of him as a Jehovah's Witness and forsaking this option that he had of just doing the 5 weeks of basic training and again getting some kind of desk job where he wouldn't have to fight and he could basically stay a pacifist. It wasn't enough that he had to lose a year and a half of his young life. He also had to figure out ways of basically serving the organization even in his prison cell, to the point where he was following this routine, this regimen of strengthening his indoctrination, reading certain Jehovah's Witness books, brushing up on the organization's history, doing daily Bible reading. It's just sad that to add insult to injury, more was expected of him than simply doing his year and a half. Now, as he mentions, the Korean government have given a bit more flexibility. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, you can now do alternative service, albeit for 3 years rather than a year and a half. And Jehovah's Witnesses in that country will be expected to do 3 years of very unpleasant jobs. And later on, in this inside story, we're going to learn what sort of job you might do if you're doing this alternative service. But again, I feel that there is scope for some perspective here, because if you watch my video on the Mexico-Malawi scandal, you will know that during the, I'm going to say 50s and 60s, Jehovah's Witnesses in Mexico were allowed to essentially bribe officials for a cartilla card, which meant that they were part of the country's reserves. They were effectively on the list of reserves for if Mexico went to war, they would be expected to fight for the country. Mexican Jehovah's Witness men were allowed to obtain this document by bribery, while during the same period, or in an overlapping period, witnesses in Malawi were supposed to refuse a card that identified them as part of the country's ruling party, a country where there was a dictatorship, there was no democracy, and every citizen had to have this card identifying that they were essentially a citizen under the rule of this single ruling party. Witnesses in Malawi were supposed to reject this card, were supposed to not buy it, even though this led to many of them, well, I'm not sure I can say on YouTube what happened, but many of them received unspeakable abuse, and some were even killed as a result of taking this stand in the name of Christian neutrality, while witnesses in Mexico were allowed to bribe officials for a card that meant that they ended up in the country's reserves. And here we're learning about Sung Hee Lee spending a year and a half in jail, again over this issue of Christian neutrality. Well, what about the witnesses in Mexico who were effectively signing up to the country's reserves by getting that cartilla card, bribing officials for that cartilla card? I wonder what Sung Hee Lee would think, or how he would react if he understood the double standard here, if he knew that at one point in the organization's history, young men in Mexico were allowed to effectively sign up to the military, while he had gone through a year and a half in jail for refusing to have even the slightest thing to do with his country's military.
You had mentioned that there was one thing in particular that was especially helpful to you, that helped you endure that difficult time in prison. Do you mind telling us about it?
Of course. Many brothers and sisters around the world, they wrote to us brothers in prison. And I personally received a number of them. In fact, I brought them, some of them here, right here with me. That someone who never met me, who never knew me, wrote such an encouraging, comforting letters.
Yes.
It really warmed my heart and really comforted me. It made me feel that I'm never alone wherever I am in the world, and that I was part of a very special, close, loving, international brotherhood. So I read them over and over again, and I saved all of these letters.
Oh, that is so encouraging, Sung Hee. But I have to ask you, why did you bring these letters with you to New York?
Actually, some of these letters came from Bethelites right here at World Headquarters. I wanted to meet them in person and tell them how much I appreciated all those letters and prayers and how they really helped me to get through my time in prison.
Well, we could certainly understand if those would have been some tearful reunions for you.
Through these experiences, I'm absolutely confident that Jehovah both hears and answers our prayers when we are faced with choices. And also, I am confident that by means of the prayers that were offered in my behalf, Jehovah helped me to stick to the choices that I had made, to stay loyal to Him. So please keep praying for our brothers in prison wherever they are in the world, and please keep writing them letters.
Well, I can assure you, Sung Hee will continue to do just that.
This is a great example of the organization using emotional reasoning. And don't get me wrong, I think it's terrible that young Korean Jehovah's Witnesses have been expected to go through this. Again, there's another side to the story, and the whole thing was fairly needless, and this was an extreme position that was taken by the organization. In my view, young Jehovah's Witness men didn't need to go through that year and a half in jail. They could have just done the basic training, got the desk job, and they would have gone through their military service without killing anyone, essentially remaining pacifists. The organization forced them to take this extreme position based on Isaiah 2 verse 4 that resulted in them losing a chunk of their young lives. Even so, I still think it's wrong that the Korean government took so long to address this situation. And yes, I do think that governments have a responsibility to uphold people's human rights, including human rights of freedom of worship. I don't agree with that extreme position based on Isaiah 2 verse 4. Oh, we can't even learn how to do warfare. I don't agree with that position, but nonetheless, it's still a belief. It's a wrong belief, but it's still a religious belief. And it's the duty of any government to come up with ways of satisfying their needs, of satisfying their security needs without trampling people's human rights. When they don't do that, when they fail to act responsibly, when they do violate human rights, look at how groups like Jehovah's Witnesses leap on it for emotional propaganda purposes. As I've said many times before on this channel, if you can appeal to people's emotions, then you can bypass entirely their critical thinking faculties, and you don't need to logically explain anything. We've learned nothing in this interview about the merits of the Jehovah's Witness theology and why it's true. We've only heard a stirring story about a young man who was spending time in jail on a matter of principle, who was showing his loyalty to a religious organization. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses will be taking away from this. For me, it's direct and overt manipulation of emotional stories as a means of coercing people.
I understand that you come from the neighboring country of Mali. In fact, I was told that your mother comes from a very interesting part of the country of Mali. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, my mother is from Timbuktu. In fact, when I was young, she took me there to visit her family.
Now, Akai, you are probably the first person that we have ever met that has actually been to Timbuktu. What is it like?
Well, as you can see on the screen, that is how the region of Timbuktu looks like. It is in the Sahara Desert, which stretches on thousands of kilometers.
What is the point of this? Am I interpreting this correctly? Are they literally making a fuss over the fact that this Gilead graduate's mother comes from a place that has a funny sounding name to Western ears? That's what this sounds like to me. How is it relevant that this student's mother comes from Timbuktu? Bear in mind, this is all supposed to be spiritual food that we're watching right now. This is supposed to be material that will enrich us spiritually. And we've literally reached the point where they are making a big deal over the fact that Gilead graduates might have family members that come from places with funny sounding names.
What can you tell us about the people of the Timbuktu region?
The people there live a nomadic lifestyle and are nearly all Muslims. Actually, both my two parents are from a Muslim background.
Now, that's quite interesting. Given that background, what were some of the challenges that you had to face in becoming one of Jehovah's Witnesses?
Although I get baptized in 15 years of age, I didn't always make the best choices in my teen years, and I had to suffer the consequences of those choices. However, in my early 20s, I decided to build a strong and personal relationship with Jehovah. To be able to do so, I received help from spiritually mature brothers and sisters, such as pioneers, elders, missionaries. For example, this is my spiritual mother on the left side of the screen, and on the right side of the screen, her missionary companion, who is still serving in Mali faithfully for 45 years now. All these mature persons helped me to see the value of personal study and thinking ability. Once I get this good habit of reasoning on Bible principles, I can now make good choices that pleases Jehovah, such as leaving my well-paying job and start pioneering. It was not easy, however, because there was still this family pressure for me to get a good job, earn a good living, but I'm still striving to try to make good decisions that please Jehovah.
So we're now learning more about what it takes to become a Gilead graduate. This is an interview with Aline and Akai Tindang from Senegal. In a short while, we're going to be learning about the circumstances under which they met. But yes, you can see here that the interviewer, Richard Chilton, is very interested in Akai's upbringing, particularly the fact that her mother came from Timbuktu. But now he's questioning Akai on her past, the fact that as a teenager, it seems she was something of a delinquent, but in her early 20s, she decided to commit to the Jehovah's Witness religion. Sounds like she went through some kind of disciplinary process, because she talks about there being consequences that she needed to live with. In any case, seems that she came through that with the help of mature ones, no doubt elders involving themselves in her life and putting her on the straight and narrow, helping her to double down essentially on her indoctrination, to the point where she ends up leaving a, quote, well-paying job to pioneer. That's the sort of sacrifice this organization is going to expect if you're going to climb the ladder. They want you to demonstrate that you're willing to put your own needs second and the organization's needs first.
And this is the Kingdom Hall where I served in. And one day we received a visit from a circuit overseer, a single circuit overseer.
Okay, now I could see when you made that comment, you looked over at Alain. So we can only assume that, Alain, you were this young, handsome, single circuit overseer that visited Akai's congregation in Sikasso. Is that right?
Well, I visit the congregation, but we had already met previously in a circuit assembly, so we knew each other. But at that time, there was nothing special going on.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification. We appreciate that.
This was a little bit creepy, if you ask me. Richard Chilton making a big deal about the fact that Alain was some young, dashing, handsome circuit overseer visiting Akai's congregation, and Alain pouring cold water on any suggestion of impropriety. But yeah, it's understandable, I suppose. Alain will have been precisely the sort of young man that Akai, as a pioneer, will have been expected to look for in terms of pursuing a relationship, getting married, and reaching out for precisely what this whole thing is about, something like Gilead, reaching out for privileges that will make her of more use to the organization, even though, as a woman, Akai isn't allowed to do any teaching, isn't allowed to express her own opinions. She can only aspire in the Jehovah's Witness religion to being the wife of someone important. She can never aspire to being important in her own right.
When we get to know better each other, we decided to get married. In fact, we were married in Senegal on one Tuesday, and we had to be that same week in Guinea-Bissau for the Circuit Assembly.
Okay, if we could just pause for just a moment here. So if we're understanding this, Alain, please tell us that there were no substitute circuit overseers available in all of West Africa that could cover that circuit assembly for you. You were married 4 days and had to be in another country for an assembly. There was no one that could take care of that assembly for you? Really?
Brother Shilton, that was fine. As you already know, the blessings of Jehovah are far beyond any sacrifices we can make in his service. We really loved that work. We loved being with our brothers and sisters.
Oh, yes, we really love preaching with them. You can see in this picture, preaching with them, it's really so special to us. Seeing them in this picture bring very nice memories even.
Yeah, we enjoyed also being with them in their homes, seeing their strong faith, their love for Jehovah despite the challenges they are facing. We really come to love them very much.
Well, just taking a look at your happy smiles on that picture there, we could see that you not only loved the work, but you loved the people that you were serving.
Again, all we're really learning is that sacrifice is required if you want to make it in Jehovah's organization. This is a couple that were essentially expected to spend their honeymoon doing the work expected of them as circuit overseer and circuit overseer's wife. They didn't even get that time to themselves. Within 4 days of being married, they had to be in the thick of it, doing the work that was expected of them by this group. Yes, they wax lyrical about it all and how wonderful it was and how they don't have any regrets. But for me, that all seemed a little bit forced. They were saying what they were expected to say. Of course, they're not going to say on the inside story at the 149th Gilead graduation, actually, we kind of regret doing that. We would have liked to have had a proper honeymoon, if you don't mind. They're always going to say, the blessings of Jehovah, that's what makes rich. Abandoning our honeymoon was totally the right call, and we'd do it all over again.
Now, from our previous discussions, it became very clear to me how much you both love and appreciate the young people that are in our organization. From your personal observations, what would you say were the things that you saw as key elements to their achieving spiritual success from your own observations?
What I have observed is that young ones who make the truth their own, who keep their spiritual routines to be able to continue building spiritual personal relationship with Jehovah, those who continue to be associating with spiritual mature brothers who can help them keep their focus are those who are more successful in their Christian course of life. I really pray, Jehovah, that all our young ones may have the same experience, that they may test and see that Jehovah is good, as mentioned in Psalm 34, verse 8. If they do, they can see that Jehovah is able to open for them doors where they think that there is no door to be opened. And that will lead them to a long and satisfying life without any regrets.
Oh, those are some beautiful comments. Thank you very much for that, Akai.
It's all so forced, isn't it? There's nothing natural about this conversation. You even wonder whether Alin and Akai are just reading off an auto cue, at least at times during this conversation. But they really don't miss an opportunity to be manipulative and culty, do they, in the inside story? Or in this 149th Gilead graduation, it's all about reminding the millions of Jehovah's Witnesses who will be watching this program that the same is expected of them. The same dedication, the same sacrifice is expected of them, to the extent where they are singling out young ones, as Stephen Lett likes to put it. They're singling out young people and saying, this is expected of you. You should really be doing exactly what this couple are doing, because they're recommending it as people who don't know anything else in their lives. How are Lynn and Akai in a position to be lecturing millions of young Jehovah's Witnesses watching this on how they should spend their lives? Because this isn't just something where you can experiment, where you can say, oh, well, I'll try maybe a couple of years of pioneering, and then I'll try maybe a couple of years of not being in a cult, and I'll see what works for me. You have to be all in on this. Once you're dedicated and baptized as a young Jehovah's Witness, that's it. You have to take the religion seriously. If you stop taking the religion seriously, if you stop going to all the meetings, if you stop making spiritual progress, you're liable to be shunned as bad association. So you don't really have a choice in the matter. And once Lynn and Akai had committed to this path of serving the organization, they didn't have a choice either. So they don't know how their lives would have turned out without being in this cult. So they're not really in a position to tell millions of young Jehovah's Witnesses, oh, you should do this. It worked for us, so it will work for you. They don't know how their lives would have been without being in a cult and without devoting themselves 24/7 to serving this organization.
Now, Angel, it's often been said that a person's story takes us on a journey of a lifetime. Your story, however, my friend, takes us on a journey of several lifetimes. Isn't that true?
Yes. You know, my great-great-grandfather and mother were the first Jehovah's Witnesses in my family. And here you can see them in 1940s in Ukraine.
Well, that is definitely a wonderful heritage to be a part of. Would you say, Angel, that the choices that members of your family made over the years had a direct bearing on your being here attending the 149th class of Gilead?
Definitely, yes. You know, they were serving Jehovah for many, many years. They had very hard but interesting life full of many different stories. For example, when my great-grandfather was exiled to Siberia because of being a Jehovah's Witness, and my great-grandmother would send him magazines hidden in the bottles of pork fat.
You said pork fat. Okay, now that sounds pretty interesting. Can you tell us more about this secret pork fat recipe of your great-grandmother?
Okay, so my mom, she made some photos and sent it to me to explain how it was done. So as you can see here, first this fat was melted so that you could have a liquid fat. Then you need to wait so that this fat would become hard and thick. Then a magazine was wrapped in the linen and hole was made in the fat. And then this wrapped magazine was put in the hole, and more fat was put on the top to hide this magazine. And now it's done. Now you have both physical and spiritual food in one bottle.
Well, there it is. Everything you need to survive in Siberia, right? Well, let me ask you, did the guards in Siberia ever find those magazines hidden in pork fat?
Sadly, but yes. And that's why they added additional 5.5 years for my great-grandfather's exile time in Siberia.
So the pork fat plan actually didn't work. Okay. Well, I think, if nothing else, the pork fat, or lard, which is what it is actually quite a good metaphor for how healthy spiritual food is when you think about it. I mean, what a fitting way to conceal the literature, even if, as we've seen, it actually didn't work. So I'm curious as to why this is even a worthwhile story to discuss. Yes, my great-grandfather had this way of concealing the literature involving lard, and it didn't work, so he only ended up getting another 5 years on his sentence. Okay, well, thank you, Angel, and it's worth introducing Angel properly. This is Angel Kachuk from Ukraine. He is, of course, another of the Gilead graduates. He's, in fact, the last interview of this year's Inside Story, and we're learning all about his heritage in the organization, about how far back the organization goes. In fact, it was interesting where Richard asked,
Would you say, Angel, that the choices that members of your family made over the years had a direct bearing on your being here attending the 149th class of Gilead?
if you think about it, this could apply to any person with multiple generations of family members who have been committed to a religion. Just the very fact that you have multiple generations of your family invested in a religion and they're passing this religion on to you and you're learning from the choices that they've made doesn't make the religion true. It's interesting how they can point to this as being advantageous when it's their religion, but they would, of course, say to someone in another religion who says, oh yes, but you don't understand, this religion goes way, way back in my family through all of these generations. A Jehovah's Witness would obviously say in that situation, well, never mind all that. We have the truth. You should leave behind, you should abandon all of that tradition and heritage just by virtue of the fact that multiple generations were in your religion doesn't make the religion true.
As you reflect upon the decisions that members of your family have made, how have their decisions affected you?
You know, they helped me to love Jehovah with all my heart and to put him always first in my life.
Can you provide us an example of that?
Yes. For example, in Ukraine, all young men are required to do military service. But I, like many other brothers, choose not to do it. I chose civilian or alternative service instead. So I was still living at home, but government gives you any work they want, and you need to do it for 2 years.
If you don't mind my asking, what job did they give you?
So, okay, they sent me to clean sewer and water system. So I need to go inside these tanks, which were so filthy, and I need to clean them out. And for me, it was really very hard work. And sometimes I felt very sad about my situation.
Yeah, we're so sorry, Angel, that you had to go through that. But we certainly appreciate your loyalty to Jehovah at the same time.
So this ties in with what we were hearing about before from Sung-Hee Lee, who was describing the fact that in South Korea, Jehovah's Witness conscientious objectors are now allowed to do 3 years of alternative service. It seems it's 2 years in the Ukraine, and now we're hearing what sort of work alternative service can involve. It can involve going into sewers for the sake of your faith. Now, I don't know enough about the situation in Ukraine to comment on whether that was the only option. At least in South Korea, I know that when you sign up for the military due to conscription, you do the 5 weeks of basic training, and you can have a non-combative role in the South Korea military. I don't know whether the same is true for Ukraine. In any case, it's regrettable that the country's government puts Jehovah's Witnesses in this situation, although I can understand why some countries would have unique security issues that require them to resort to conscription. And obviously, if you're going to have a conscription policy, you can't just allow anyone to opt out of it for any reason. And it's conceivable that people would use religion as an excuse, even if they're not particularly religious. On the other hand, Jehovah's Witnesses are also putting conscientious objectors like Angel in difficult situations by making this a matter of loyalty. If Angel doesn't go into the sewer, if he doesn't keep his Christian neutrality intact, there will be consequences. He could end up being disassociated and shunned by his believing family, and we've already learned that he has a large believing family, many generations in fact, who would all be required to shun him if he didn't fulfill the expectations of his religion and accept the alternative service and get in that sewer.
Can you tell us, though, what has been the highlight for you from your Gilead training?
Yes, Gilead had helped me to see more, to understand more, and to feel more. To see more this wonderful history of Jehovah's people, this wonderful heritage we all have. To understand more these wonderful deep Bible gems, Bible lessons for my life, and to feel more Jehovah's love and love of brothers and sisters, especially here. You know, my family, they had just few magazines, few books, and songbook. But it was enough for them to build strong faith in Jehovah. So in the new world, I want to see all of my big family. And I want to share with them these wonderful gems I learned here on Gilead while they were sleeping. And I want to say them thank you for setting such a good example of faith for me.
Well, Angel, you have certainly touched our hearts by means of that beautiful story. Thank you for sharing your family legacy with all of us. We really appreciated that.
Thank you.
I can actually relate to Angel because, as I mentioned in part one of this series, I've been through ministerial training school, which is kind of, or was kind of, a condensed version of Gilead. So whereas Gilead takes place over 5 months, MTS, or the School for Kingdom Evangelizers, takes place over a much shorter period. My course was only 2 months. But I was one of those students who, during the graduation ceremony, was invited up on the platform to talk about my background in just the same way as Angel is doing now. And I too mentioned the resurrection. I too mentioned the fact that I had lost loved ones in death. In fact, at the time of my MTS, I was still in the early stages of recovering from losing my mother, who died only 4 years previous. So I was obviously talking about how wonderful MTS was and how I was making my mother proud by attending. And it's all very emotional, isn't it? But that, again, doesn't make it true. And isn't it sad that this is an organization that hijacks the grieving process and leverages people's memories of loved ones as a tool to keep them loyal, as a tool to keep them compliant? In all honesty, when I really look back with total candor at my MTS experience, there really wasn't anything special about it. We were just studying the literature that, for the most part, any Jehovah's Witness can read. Everything we were studying at MTS is basically already available in the publications or on Watchtower Online Library. Once or twice they would use the Elder's Manual. I obviously didn't have a copy because I was a ministerial servant at the time, but I was sat next to an elder in our classroom, and he would open his book and I would obviously sneak a glance at what it said. Yeah, there wasn't really any secret information that was made available to us. It was all stuff that's already in the literature. The MTS course, and I'm guessing the same is true of Gilead, it was just a condensed indoctrination session. It was just an opportunity for students to completely immerse themselves in study of the organization's publications over a period of months. That's all it is. And when you're being interviewed afterwards, if you're being interviewed afterwards, or even if it's just someone asking you about it when you get back to your congregation, you're just not going to say, yeah, it was okay, wasn't that special. To be honest, we just studied the publications that anyone can study. You're not going to say that, are you? You're obviously going to wax lyrical. You're obviously going to big it up and pretend that it's something deeply profound, when in fact all it is a concentrated indoctrination program.
As we've learned from the experiences shared by our 4 guests today, the choices that we make do matter. They matter to ourselves, to our family members, to our worldwide brotherhood, and especially to our loving God, Jehovah. We hope that you have been both encouraged and motivated by the experiences you've heard today. Until we meet again on a future edition of The Inside Story, please enjoy this brief little snapshot of Class 149.
We were not disappointed. Thank you, Brother Chilton, along with the students who assisted you.
Yeah, Sam Hurd seems really excited there about what we've just watched. Speak for yourself, Samuel Hurd. I wouldn't say I was disappointed. I was certainly underwhelmed. I think, considering the fact that there were 25 students on the 149th Gilead class, and we saw them there all waving in the snow, didn't we? Gosh. You would think, I don't know, maybe it's just me, you would think that out of those 25 students, we would have more compelling stories than that. All we've heard is a story about a guy who was a conscientious objector in South Korea, whose experience with jail only served to strengthen his indoctrination and strengthen his belief that there was something special about his religion. We heard from a couple, a circuit overseer and his wife in Senegal, who skipped their honeymoon or cut short their honeymoon in order to do what was expected of them. And we've heard from another conscientious objector in Ukraine who has a long heritage. Many generations of his family are Jehovah's Witnesses. That's it. Those are the most compelling stories out of the 25 students who attended the 149th class of Gilead. But that brings us to the end of part 2 of my rebuttal to the 149th Gilead graduation. Look out for part 3 in the coming days, because yes, I'm afraid there's a little bit more to go. There will be, I believe, some form of concluding talk that it may be worth listening in on or watching. But in any case, I hope you found my thoughts interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.